Financial analysis, evaluating relevant data to reach sound financial decisions, is one of the important tasks of financial management. There are two primary types of these decisions: optimization decisions and incremental decisions. I'm Frank Werner, Associate Professor of Finance at Fordham University in New York City. In this video, we will explore optimization decisions and look at the two most studied optimization decisions in finance. In the next video, we will extend our understanding of financial analysis to incremental decisions. Optimization involves finding the best value for some variable. This could be the highest possible value, for example, a decision about revenues where higher is better, or it could be the lowest possible value, for example, a decision about costs where lower is better. If you have previously studied the differential calculus, you'll recognize how this can be done mathematically, by writing a function, taking the first derivative of that function, and setting the derivative equal to 0. However, understanding the logic of optimization decisions does not require a background in calculus. Besides, in most cases, and not just in financial analysis, it is difficult, if not impossible, to write an accurate function in the first place. There are typically too many variables to consider, and their impact is usually not fully known. For example, how could you write a mathematical function to describe the best diet for you and your family, or the best group of friends to share your life experiences with? Much of the research on financial management optimization decisions was done during the latter part of the 20th century, when shareholder wealth maximization was considered to be the goal of the for-profit company. As a result, the best value meant the one that produced the greatest financial value for shareholders, and for the most part, this is still a state of this area of finance theory. Recently, however, like much of finance theory, this approach is evolving, initially to finding the best value subject to the need to be environmentally and socially responsible, and more recently, toward finding the best value for stakeholders as a whole. It is important to note that there are times when optimization decisions have a big impact, and it is therefore important to find the best solution. But there are other times when optimization decisions are far less important. This graph indicates schematically when optimization decisions are important. There is a clear maximum value, and even small deviations from that optimum are significant. This graph, on the other hand, indicates when optimization decisions are not too important. While there is a maximum value, deviations from that optimum do not make a whole lot of difference. Of the various financial management optimization decisions that have been studied, the most significant one for for-profit companies is known as the capital structure decision, or the debt-equity mix decision. What is the best combination of debt and equity financing? What proportion of the company's financing should be debt, and what proportion should be equity? What is the impact on a company's financial value if it has more debt relative to its equity, or less debt relative to its equity? Now, the reason that this decision is relevant to financial value is that when a company borrows money, it changes both its returns and risks, an effect known as financial leverage. This graph illustrates what happens. The horizontal axis is the company's earnings before interest and taxes, abbreviated EBIT, how much it earns before financing considerations. The vertical axis is the company's earnings per share, or EPS, its earnings after interest and taxes are paid, divided by the number of shares of stock outstanding. The more the company borrows, the steeper the line becomes. Note the following. If the company's EBIT is high, the right-hand side of the graph, borrowing results in higher earnings per share, increasing shareholder value. However, if the company's EBIT is low, the left-hand side of the graph, borrowing reduces earnings per share. And the steeper the line, the more volatile earnings per share become, changing more in response to a change in EBIT than if the company had borrowed less or not at all. Both the possibility of a lowered amount and increased volatility of earnings per share are additional risks, and this reduces shareholder value. The best amount of debt is the one where the positive impact of increased earnings per share outweighs the negative impact of the risks by the greatest amount. It turns out that at the best debt-equity mix, the cost to the company of its financing is minimized. This number is known as the company's cost of capital and is a combination of the interest rate on the company's debt and the rate of return required by its shareholders. Now, debt is less expensive financing than equity. Since lenders have a contract specifying the interest rate and how much and when they will be repaid, they face far less risk than shareholders who have no such promises, and the shareholders therefore require a greater rate of return. So, a company that elects to finance with more debt and less equity lowers its financing costs. On the other hand, more debt and less equity increases the risks both lenders and investors face, and eventually both groups increase the rate of return they require, offsetting the benefit of the cheaper debt. At the optimal debt-equity mix, the cost of capital is minimized. One of the most famous insights in finance theory was about the capital structure decision, and came from Professors Franco Modigliani and Merton Miller, both of whom subsequently won the Nobel Prize in Economics for their work. They concluded that the capital structure decision didn't matter at all, because investors could lend or borrow on their own to adjust whatever debt-equity mix the company chose, thereby creating their own desired debt-equity mix. To arrive at their conclusion, Modigliani and Miller made quite a few assumptions to simplify the problem. And while convenient for their analysis, some of these assumptions were simply not realistic. Today, most people think that the capital structure decision does matter, primarily due to two competing effects. Interest on debt is tax deductible, so the more debt, the greater the tax benefit. However, the risks of greater debt are very real, which implies a limit to how much a company should borrow. This graph illustrates the trade-off. As the company takes on more debt, its value rises, but only for a while. Turning capital structure theory into practice has proved to be very difficult, and so a practical approach has emerged to guide financial managers. This approach is known by the acronym FRICTO, which stands for flexibility, risk, income, control, timing, and the catch-all last category, other. Flexibility refers to maintaining the ability to raise funds in the form of debt or equity whenever desired. It comes from avoiding restrictive covenants on existing debt or borrowing so much that equity is the only alternative. Risk in this context also refers to borrowing too much, which can reduce earnings per share and make it more volatile, and increase the possibility of not being able to make the required interest and principal payments to a dangerous level. Income is the magnification of the firm's earnings per share, the leverage that comes from debt and from limiting the number of common shares outstanding. Control is a reminder that when a company issues additional shares of stock, it dilutes the voting power of the shares that were outstanding prior to the new issue. Timing reminds us that sometimes interest rates are low, and that is the time to borrow, while at other times a company's stock price is high so that it can raise equity by not selling too many additional shares. And other includes legal restrictions, the ability for assets to serve as collateral to reduce interest rates, and the issues surrounding the speed and amount of money required. Professors Modigliani and Miller also investigated a corporation's dividend policy. What is the optimal amount of the corporation's earnings to pay out as dividends? And correspondingly, what is the optimal amount to retain and reinvest in the company? Their conclusion was the same as for capital structure. Under certain conditions, it doesn't matter. And their logic was the same as well. Shareholders have it in their power to create any dividend experience they desire. If the company pays more in dividends than a shareholder wants, the shareholder can reinvest the excess amount. If the company pays less than a shareholder wants, the shareholder can sell a few shares to create the equivalent of additional dividends. However, just like the capital structure decision, selecting the best dividend policy is more of a practical matter than a theoretical one. The two most important considerations are the cash needs of the company and the stability of dividend payments. Young, fast-growing companies need a lot of cash and typically do not pay dividends, while older, more mature companies, no longer growing rapidly, don't need to retain as much cash and pay comparatively high dividends. And once a company begins to pay dividends, it tends to keep the dividend amount unchanged for multiple payments to convey stability and predictability to its shareholders, hence lower their risk. Earlier in this video, we introduced the concept of a company's cost of capital, which, as currently used, refers only to financial capital, the money the company borrows and the money invested by shareholders. Today, however, finance thinkers are re-examining this concept because we now recognize that companies use many more sources of capital than just money. These other forms of capital include human capital, the knowledge, skills, and experiences of the company's employees and others who serve the company, social capital, the relationships among stakeholders that impact the company, natural capital, the physical resources, such as water, used by the company, and the quality of the environment within which the company operates, and organizational capital, the company's culture and systems that contribute to its success. So the concept of the cost of capital is expanding to incorporate this much broader set of resources used by organizations. And more companies are considering how they can return value to all of these capital sources. What we've discovered is that optimization decisions in finance are really hard to make. The best we can do is get close to what we think is an optimum value and then adjust from time to time as economic and financial conditions change. I remember once asking the treasurer of a major U.S. corporation how we approached the capital structure decision. His response was that from time to time he would call his banker and ask what the interest rate would be on a new loan. When he saw that number going up, he knew he should be careful about increasing the company's debt. Until then, it was okay to borrow some more. But the real learning from the study of optimization decisions is that they often don't matter very much. The difference between the precise optimum point and nearby values is likely to be small, and in most cases, nearly impossible to quantify.